Welcome to Our College, Your Voices. I'm your guest host, Russ Baker. I'm really excited to be hosting today's panel. Before I introduce our 5 faculty panelists, I just want to provide a brief background on how this panel presentation has evolved. Those of you who work at Ivy Tech Community College are aware that Ivy Tech has added an additional objective to our strategic plan just this past spring. It focuses on diversity, equity, and belonging. In thinking about the crucial role played by our faculty to create an atmosphere of inclusion and celebration, not just tolerance, of diversity, I suggested to Dr. Monroe that we convene a faculty panel to discuss their experiences as diverse faculty members at Ivy Tech. She not only loved the idea, she asked that I serve as the facilitator of the discussion. Before we begin today's discussion, I want to remind all of us that diversity includes, but goes far beyond, racial and ethnic diversity. Some diversity is visible immediately, and some is not. We may explore some of those issues a bit today. Our goal in setting up this panel was to bring individuals from a variety of diversity definitions. I understand that we don't have representation from all of the possible definitions, but I'm very pleased with the variety of campuses and experiences our panelists represent. I also want to thank each of our panelists personally for their willingness to share their own experiences on a topic that can sometimes be very personal and possibly even a bit painful to discuss. Finally, those who know me may be thinking that I do not meet any of the usual definitions of diversity. But as we prepared for today's discussion, one of our panelists helpfully suggested to me that with my advanced age, I am now in a protected class. So now that I feel old, let's meet the panel. Well, hello, everyone. I can't wait to get into our discussion, but before we do that, I just want to ask each of you to introduce yourselves and include your role at Ivy Tech. We're just going to go in alphabetical order. And then if you don't mind, also share why you believe you were asked to be on this faculty diversity panel. And Alex, we'll start with you.
So my name is Alex Antic. I'm the program chair for mechanical engineering technology at Lafayette campus. And I've been struggling with MS for about 7 or 8 years now, and it's fairly debilitating, and I use a walker or a wheelchair to get around.
Julius
Edwards. I am the Dean at the School of Business and the School of Public Affairs for Ivy Tech, Indianapolis. I believe as an African-American male, I can bring that perspective to this conversation.
Colette.
Hi, I'm Colette Emery, Department Chair of Communication and Student Success at Lake County. And my role as a woman of color, I think I can provide some insight to my experience as a faculty member here.
Erin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Lehman. I teach English in Columbus, and recently I accepted a 1-year reassignment with Ivy Online. And I suspect that I was asked to join this panel because I am a woman of color.
Very good. And Tony.
My name is Tony Ramey. I am an assistant professor of business at the Fort Wayne campus. I believe I was asked to join this panel because I am an out gay man and have been with my current husband for 23 years. I always like to share that.
That's great. Thanks for all of you, again, for being part of this. I actually met Tony quite a few years ago when I was in Fort Wayne, and there's actually most of you on the panel that I've had a chance to interact with a bit, but some of you I actually met just for the first time today. So I can't wait to get into the discussion. I want to just start with a question that I will ask each of you to respond to. And as we get into other questions, you may not all need to respond to each one, but let's just have a conversation here today about your experience, again, as a diverse faculty member, and both the good and the bad of that. As we've prepared for this, I think I've told all of you, I don't want this to feel like a conversation where you can only talk about the good things. This isn't trying to be Pollyannish about only seeing the positive that's happened. But again, we're going to have a great conversation. So as you think back on your experiences as a faculty member at Ivy Tech, what is the one diversity-related story or experience that stands out to you the most vividly?
Allow me to warm everybody's heart with this story. So because it takes me a long time to walk, I was coming in one day and it was pouring rain and I was getting soaked. And this student saw that from inside the building, came running out with an umbrella, sheltered me, opened the door for me, and helped me in. That's a great way to experience diversity in my school.
Thank you. And I just have to add that there's emotion on Alex's face as he shares that anecdote. So that's a great way to get started. What are some of the things that others of you think of? Some diversity-related experience you've had since being here at Ivy Tech?
Oh, I'll take the next one. I guess mine is probably recently. As a dean, we get to do the dean's reception, and I enjoy the, bringing people together and having a conversation about, how well the students are doing and watching their family and friends come out and see them. Well, after the end of the speeches and all that fun stuff, we start, most of the time is sitting around doing the pictures. We're going through and we have about 100 and something students who are on the dean's reception, and they're coming through and taking their pictures, and we're standing with the students and the faculty and the program chairs and the family and friends. Well, after the pictures was over with, African-American woman and her young son walked up to me and said, "You know what? I am so proud of this day. My son has seen a Black president in his lifetime, and now he can see a Black dean." And today he didn't know what a dean was. He just said, "Mommy, there's a Black man up there. Is he supposed to be up there?" So I was able. So she explained to him what a dean was and the role and position, responsibilities that come with that. And the son said, "I want to be like that." So that was a very proud moment.
Yeah, that's cool.
For me, most of my experiences at Ivy Tech have been extremely positive. The one that stands out to me that wasn't overly negative, but we were at a meeting and my husband was there, and the person introduced themselves to us and thought it was appropriate to bring up the Religious Freedom Restoration Act to two gay men. And we were both extremely uncomfortable in that moment. And to me, that wasn't over the top, but it was, in that moment, wasn't a pleasant experience, which led to a large discussion in our household as well. On the positive side, though, I always remember when I did get married officially in 2013, that all the colleagues in the School of Business had a small reception for us at the college during our meeting and gave us a gift. And it really made me feel part of that team even more than I'd already felt.
When I first started teaching, I didn't put my photo or anything in the course. We worked with Blackboard then. And so it wasn't, I guess it wasn't required. I never did it. And I would meet with students in the online environment. Some of them would come in and maybe they'd be upset about their papers, or they'd want to talk to me, or I'd encourage them to come visit me. But I remember when we switched to Canvas or Ivy Learn, and we were all encouraged to put our profile picture up there. All of a sudden, there was this switch in the students that were coming to see me. And much earlier, a lot of international students, a lot of young women, single moms. And I had this realization that, they wanted to see me. And now that they see me, they want to come talk to me. And that was really exciting. It was a good realization for me that the way I looked might have had a positive impact.
Why do you think that might be? Why do you think that once they saw your picture, they were more likely to come and see you?
Well, Russ, I think it's a good picture.
Well, no, of course.
I think it was more accessible to them, and especially to some of the young women in my classroom, that they had someone that might have similar experiences. And I think anyone wants to go and meet someone once they feel like they're not a stranger. So maybe not putting my picture up was a really bad decision on my part.
Okay. Colette?
Okay. So I have more of a neutral experience. I've been with the college for 9 years. And early on in about 2013, I became a program chair in the remedial department for English. So I went to my first curriculum committee meeting here in Indy, and I was one of the other two people of color, African-American woman. And I believe there was a woman there from, the Middle East. So I was expecting more diversity. And also in that particular meeting, I think I was one of the younger faculty members there. So the age factor and also the race factor, I don't know what I was expecting, but it was just more of a shock than anything. So.
And you still remember it pretty vividly.
I do.
Yeah.
I do. Yeah.
Okay, great. As we said at the introduction, I deliberately decided that for this panel, we would focus on people who have faculty status. Julius Edwards is a dean now, as he already mentioned, but he still is also an administrative faculty member, so he qualifies. Obviously, many of our staff are also diverse, and this isn't meant to leave them out. But for this conversation, we did want to focus on faculty, and one of the reasons is that each of you either currently or have been regularly in the classroom, and you're teaching students. And so based on that role as a faculty member, the next question I want to ask you is, as a faculty member who embraces your own diversity, however that's defined, how have you practiced inclusive pedagogy in your classroom, and how have you created a classroom environment where students from all backgrounds feel comfortable and accepted? So who wants to jump in with an answer to that one?
I'll jump in with that one. I teach communication, and on day one, we have an icebreaker. I start all of my classes off with an icebreaker just to create community. But this one in particular is a autograph icebreaker where it compels the students to get out of their seats and get an autograph. You know, if you like broccoli, do you have a V in your name? Just anything. Why do you like Doctor Who? And it breaks that social ice. And also in week one, I talk about diversity and frame of reference and how we highlight our difference as an asset. And I get my students in small groups, we collaborate. So I think that helps indirectly to help us all embrace diversity in the classroom.
I focus a lot on lecture and assignments. And I teach marketing, is normally what I focus on. And some assignments I did early, to me, it was always scary. Am I doing the right thing or not doing the right thing when you're giving assignments and you're trying to include diversity as a Caucasian male that they don't necessarily know that I'm gay, because they don't necessarily share that. And how is that going to come across to the classroom? A couple things I've done is assignments. One of the first ones I did back in 2009 where I was teaching full time was ask each student to bring an ad in the next week and be prepared to discuss. It was different from them. So I give them examples. If you're a Christian, see if you can find an advertisement that is really focused towards the Jewish community. If you're straight, find an advertisement and so forth. And so it opened it up to all kinds of diversity. And I wasn't focused on just one set, gay, straight, black, white, whatever that might be. So I do that. Also, I may intentionally always bring up diversity in the sense of, if I'm showing a commercial during that segment, I will find one for Levi's, for example, and I show this commercial of this straight gentleman pulling up his jeans in a telephone booth. It's an older Levi's commercial. And I go right into the next one, and they've taken that same commercial, and it's a gay person doing it. And then I'll find another one. The next ad will be related to African-American, Asian. And so that's how I try to bring it up, by showing examples. And then I hope that brings the students to realize that, hey, wait a minute, he's open to a lot of different ideas and people.
Tony, have you gotten any resistance or pushback to some of those efforts that you've made?
You know, the biggest one that I get is laughter, especially in that example of Levi's commercial. When I do bring up gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender issues, which is not a lot. I mean, that's not my main intent of the class, but when I have those opportunities to do so, the laughter comes up. And I have to, that's a hard one to address, because in that setting in a moment, and I have asked, hey, because usually I'm trying not to point anyone out. Well, what's funny about the ad, try to make it and see if someone would want to have that discussion. And on top of that, sorry, I should say, if I'm aware that if someone is gay in the classroom, I am paying attention to that person in that moment too, because I may need to have a discussion with the person that was laughing or with the person that may have been affected by just paying attention to the students' faces.
So we're talking about inclusive pedagogy, which is just a fancy way of saying techniques, teaching techniques, instructional techniques, and strategies that you've used. Anyone else with examples?
I would go back to, in some of my classes, we have students who have worked with DSS to get accommodations for learning. And so sometimes you have students who come in who have someone who does sign language for them, or you have someone who's has transcribing notes and stuff for them. So one of the things that I did, this was back in my math classes, not when I was teaching business classes, was kind of set the stage for the students in terms of, when you raise your hand to address a question, make sure you articulate that loudly and clearly so it can be picked up. Kind of be cognizant of just like the time it takes to translate so the person so it can be received. Just little things like that help students to kind of be more cognitive of those situations and how they're giving information out, especially in the math class where students are quick to try to walk through a problem quickly, and someone's trying to translate or someone's trying to transcribe it and are missing steps, so it can throw off the whole format of it. So,
encouraging the exploration of different perspectives, which probably stem from different experiences, is a critical piece of the English course that I teach. If I have a really homogenous group where everyone really wants to seem like they're the same, or they all want to have the same perspective on an issue, then it's really difficult to teach academic argument, which is an important part of English 111 and English 112. So I do try to promote an atmosphere where different people and different ideas and divergent ideas are really accepted, because that's kind of the heart of the critical thinking process. It's important to create a classroom where students feel like they can explore different ideas.
In that direction, in the mechanical engineering technology courses, one of the intro examples that I use is a basically it's a space example where we look at space exploration. Is it worth it? And I have my students argue for and against space exploration. And to follow up on that point, their opinions are trying to follow mine, and I try not to lead them. So I'll hold off and say, well, I don't have an opinion about this. I want to know what you think. It's very challenging for students to take themselves and take them out of that I want to please you idea. And I think that's what you're experiencing in your English courses too. And I see that in engineering as well, where students want to be like you. They're looking up to you. They want to see the world from your perspective, and they want to show you that they can do that because they want to grow into what you're showing them to be. And because of that, it's a barrier in a way, because they want to reach out and be who you are, but that keeps them from being who they are. We always have to be careful of that. And I try to back off and be like, no, what do you think? Is it good to go to space or bad to go to space? I don't have an opinion. There's no horse in my race. I will not be going to space, I guarantee you. And I like having that conversation with students, and I think they get something out of that when they realize that they are, in fact, free to have an opinion.
That's an intriguing comment, Alex, and I really like it. But I want to dig a little deeper on that, because while we want to, I think, recognize and acknowledge our students' right to have and even push them to have their own opinion and not try to give the answer that they think you want, it seems to me that the educational process also does include prodding, if that's the right word, or challenging our students to new ways of thinking, and maybe challenging their own beliefs that they've had. Not that those beliefs are necessarily wrong, but I'll use the example of my own upbringing in a very strong, and I would call it strict, Christian faith. For me, at some point in my development, I had to decide what of those beliefs were meaningful to me and kind of work through that whole process of developing my own value system. So when it comes to diversity, to bring it back to our topic today, how do you both provide space for students to share their own opinions without apology, but also prod them towards maybe new ways of thinking? That's a tough question. It's not directed at anyone specifically, but I think I'm kind of basing that again, Alex, off what you said, that you want students to give their own authentic answer, but that I think we also want to encourage our students to think deeper about their own beliefs and maybe in some cases modify them.
I'll jump in. So in my interpersonal communication class, when we talk about perception, I touch on stereotyping, and the homework assignment is to think about the crime dramas that we watch, like Law and Order, CSI, 48 Hours, and we talk about police officers and stereotyping. Now, for that particular assignment, it's online where the students just submit their responses to me, and the content is so surprising. And in those responses, I mean, students from all backgrounds have had some run-ins, but really in that example, it's more about the power issue, not so much skin color or gender. And sometimes I'll go back and say, well, I got some really great insight. Would you all like to share, in class if they want to, fine, if not. But I feel that when they write their responses directly to me, I'm getting that honest feedback. Something that I do in my communication, the public speaking classes, I'll show speeches from women, from men, political leaders, business leaders, all throughout the semester to also highlight that diversity, the content, who the speaker is, their industry that they're representing. So I think that's another way to help the students, help them frame their ideas of diversity, but also respect others.
So in my consumer behavior class, which I really enjoy because it leads to this discussion about who they are, what do they look like, how do you interact with those consumers? Because they're not going to all look like you, or you may not see that they're different than you, even though they could be. They could have a disability you can't see, or they could be gay like me and you just assume that they're straight. So I challenge them to just look at it from a different point of view. And I always say, don't agree with me, don't go from my point of view, come up with your own and just be respectful about it. And it usually opens up a good discussion as long as they're coming from a positive place with the discussion.
I agree with that. I think when you're having the in-class discussions and you're trying to get the dialogue going, when you introduce a topic, you have to be careful not to add too much content to it before you let the discussion start, because then students kind of read what the instructor may be trying to lead the direction of the conversation to, or get an idea of where he or she may stand in terms of the discussion. So sometimes when you're introducing, well, let's talk about how hair plays a part in movies or commercials, and disparities in how hair has been viewed. Even the word disparity can give a student an idea of, well, okay, sound like from my instructor that he has an issue with how people's hair have been portrayed in movies and in commercials. So you have to be cognizant of even just the wording of how you try to introduce those topics.
So I'm going to change the focus of our conversation a little bit now to Ivy Tech's interest in hiring more diverse faculty members. And it's something that we're committed to. We've talked about wanting to have the gap between the diversity of our student body and the diversity of our faculty closed, because right now on most of our campuses, the student body is more diverse than the faculty who are teaching them. So with that, you are all full-time faculty members. I want to ask you, and this is an opinion question, we may have some disagreement here, but do you think full-time faculty candidates should be required to write a statement of diversity in their applications? And then if so, how could we revisit those statements in the annual evaluation in a meaningful way? We ask our candidates who are applying for jobs to fill out an application and answer quite a few questions. Should we ask them to write a statement of diversity as part of that? What do you think?
So this is something that would be added. Do you know if is anyone doing this on their campus right now? Is anyone asking candidates to do
Not
that?
to my knowledge specifically. They may do that for some specific positions. I can't say for sure, Aaron, but in terms of a standard question for faculty, we're not doing this to my knowledge. And this question actually came from one of you who suggested we add this. So I'm not aware, Colette, I'll call you out. This was a question that you suggested we talk about, which is perfect. Are you aware of any places that are currently doing this?
No, I'm not.
Okay. I didn't think so. So that's as far as we know, this would be a new practice, Aaron.
I found it very interesting. I'm not sure how I feel about it, to be honest, because I like the idea. The part I kind of caught my attention was the evaluation process. I have to admit I wasn't a big fan of that because I don't know how you could quantify that, or it could be very difficult to. But then I also thought, well, boy, you really could do it in the promotion side. If you want to get promoted, could you write that philosophy is in there, like we do with the teaching philosophy sometimes? That was just a few thoughts I had about it.
I think with the evaluation piece, perhaps if a faculty member, attends an event or like a recruiting event, something on campus, visit a museum, things that I think are tangible, easy to do rather. I think that's a way that it could be evaluated, or perhaps through maybe taking a class or reading a book, or I don't know, subscribing to a podcast, just some way to get more insight on diversity.
Anyone else with thoughts on that one?
I'm on the fence with it. I can't. If I'll be honest, I'm not really a big supporter of it. And my reason is because I'm not sure what it accomplish. And I'll use the example of a teaching philosophy. When faculty apply for a faculty position, they submit a teaching philosophy. And you bring them in, we interview them, and one of the things faculty always say is, I believe in engaging students. I believe in making sure I'm interacting with students and making sure so they understand the content. And then they do the teaching demonstration. And they pull up 55 slides for a 10-minute teaching demonstration, and they never deviate from the PowerPoint. I think with a diversity statement, what are we hoping to gain from that? I think your actions speak better than what you can put on paper. And in the age of social access, for those who have like LinkedIn accounts and stuff, your activities that are there or on your resume or in your conversations or conveyed in your answers to your questions should, in its simplest nature, convey some of that understanding of diversity and inclusion that we're hoping that you can articulate in a statement. I guess that's my thought about that is it should be organic as opposed to more structured.
So your concern with a written statement of diversity might be related to thinking that people can write down a lot of nice sounding words, but you're more interested in what you can see in a more authentic way, I guess.
Definitely, yeah. The statement she made about in terms of talking or doing or writing to meet the needs of the faculty members, the same thing for candidates who are applying. I'm going to write this knowing that you want to know that I am open to diversity and inclusion and that I believe everyone has options, blah, 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 blah. And I may do. I mean, I don't want to discount someone's statement, but are the actions predicated in that in terms of on their resume? Is it predicated in terms of their LinkedIn account? I'll leave Facebook and all that mess alone. But is it predicated in their LinkedIn account? If I Google them and I see that they've had some activities, that celebrate diversity and inclusion, there's so much content out there, for the most part, sometimes good and bad, that to me tells a better story than a statement.
Okay, fair enough. Let's turn to maybe, again, as we think about Ivy Tech just beginning to develop our 8th strategic planning goal around diversity. What's an area where you think we need further improvement in order to create the kind of inclusive environment that we're envisioning at Ivy Tech? Where's something that still needs to be worked on a bit more?
For me, it's that thing I mentioned, being in the classroom and not knowing how to handle it. I wish I had some training, in-depth training on when someone makes a comment that makes me uncomfortable or makes another student, how do I handle it in the best way for both students and myself? And that's one thing. It may be out there, and if it is, I'm just not aware of it, but that would be very helpful to me.
Some additional training. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And for me, it would be more than, I know we're starting some online training on diversity. I'm talking about something hands-on. Is it something bigger where we get the human rights campaign to come in, where someone that's really, this is what they do for a living, and really help us do these type of things? That's just an example that are true content experts in these areas. Or I don't know if they offer that or not, but
I think that's a good suggestion, because sometimes, maybe some comment or something happens in the classroom, like you said, where we aren't quite sure what we should do or what we should say. I'm a person, so I know to say, hey, let's be kind, or this was disrespectful because of this, or this was uninformed for this reason. But other than the lived experience of being, a 5'2" Asian woman, I don't have scholarly background in diversity and equity, other than kind of the reason to be compassionate. I would like a little bit more backing as to how I should handle some of those situations.
So when we talked about how to handle situations in the classroom, it sounds like some of us are ill-equipped for that. And I think that part of our experience in the classroom is what works and what doesn't. And we go through that constantly with a myriad of topics. So one of the, I think training's nice, but it tends to be kind of a cookie cutter approach to what is really not a done deal. We have to have this conversation. It's an ongoing thing. And I think that our relationships with our students need to be such that we can interact with them. And like we said before, they want to please us. They want us to want to give them the A. They want to say the correct things. They want to understand what we do. So we have to be sure that we're leading by example and being inclusive in our language, which is tough sometimes. I've said guys more than once to a classroom because most of my classes are all men, but occasionally that one lady in the back row, and I'm like, I mean, people, or try to open it up, because I know that's not inclusive. And I know that it's easy for us to have this little bit of what we would call a microaggression in what we say, and it might hurt somebody a little bit. And I've become more aware of that myself and what I do. I try to be better, and I do my best, but we still slip. But we have to catch ourselves and show our students that, hey, I'm not perfect, but I'm aware. And I'm fixing that right now for everybody's benefit. And in a way, even though I didn't say it perfectly the first time, it's almost better to screw up and to show them the right way to make it correct. So in a way, we do that. And I think that might be what you have to do in situations when students are doing it wrong. Show them that there's a way to correct themselves. Teach them that. Is that helpful?
Yeah. Anyone else?
I'd like to add, in the past, when I've had students make an inappropriate comment, I would pull them to the side after class and just let them know my focus is to create a open communication climate where everyone feels welcome and invited, and just to ask them to be more mindful. And in most cases, it's well received, and they are. Or before we have a discussion, I'll say, we may not agree, but let's just be respectful. We can still be respectful even if we don't agree. So usually that helps.
And I agree, creating an atmosphere in the classroom where you can have that dialogue, but you can have a respectful conversation. I think that starts from day one. We talk. I know we are in our student success commitment to students, and part of that is learning students' names. Make sure we interact with them as early as possible. All that plays a part in creating that atmosphere. So when you have these dialogues, students are more comfortable talking about from their perspective. And then other students are more respectful in terms of listening to that, and maybe, like you said, not agreeing, but understanding, okay, I hear what he's saying. I don't quite agree with what he's saying, but I respect it, as opposed to sometimes the shouting match can occur when one side feels the other one is completely off basis and, encounter. So I think that starts from the first day, where we talk about, saying hello to people, your students when they first come in, get to know their names as soon as possible, building that that atmosphere of respect and comfortability. So when those conversations come up, you can have those comfortable dialogues.
In your interactions with our students and with your faculty colleagues, either individually or in the classroom, how have your students, and again, maybe faculty colleagues, reacted to your efforts to discuss diversity and your own experiences as a diverse faculty member? I know that's kind of a long question, but if your students and your colleagues know that you're diverse, and I think all of you have said you're open about your diversity, whether it's visible or not, how have students reacted to that? And maybe how have your colleagues reacted to that? Have you ever sensed any hostility to your efforts to be inclusive?
I know I have. Example again is I was sharing some Pew research on what the demographic shifts were happening in the United States. And with our current political climate at the border, when I was bringing this up, I had students rolling their eyes, would make these noises. You just knew it was like, oh, this is a lie. He's trying to sell me something. So that was an
possibly fake news.
Possibly fake news. I mean, and that's, I don't ever go down that road. I try to say, hey, this is Pew research. This is legitimate. And, because we're lecturing, it's in the textbooks. I'm trying to bring additional resources to supplement what they're reading so they believe it. Because in that particular environment, they're not. And then my Latino students in those moments, again, are struggling because they're hearing these noises. And I don't necessarily know who that is, to be honest, sometimes. But then I'm trying to address it in a fact-based way.
Other experiences?
Sometimes in my teaching, I'll talk about my life as a, former college student and what life was like for me on campus and how I struggled in math or dealt with, difficult situations. And I'll just use that as a way to establish a common ground with the students. Sometimes they'll come up and talk to me after class to get more insight or, share their stories. So I just think being transparent and talking about, whatever successes or failures I've had with diversity or, working with difficult people, I think that resonates with the students.
Okay, well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm pretty sure we could extend it longer. We may just do that. I'll talk about that in a minute. But before we do and kind of wrap up today's session, the last question I'd like to ask each of you to think about and share is, again, we're in the process of beginning to build another strategic planning goal around diversity, equity, and belonging. Doran Moreland is working on that, and there'll be a number of Ivy Tech faculty and staff part of his team. As we develop that goal, what's something we really need to be intentional about addressing or including in that, from your perspective, again, as a faculty member?
I think training our faculty to create a supportive communication climate from day one, and maintaining that when there are difficult situations, whether they're engaging with students outside of class, online. So that's what I feel, the supportive communication climate.
Okay.
I think for me, as we think about diversity, not only internally with staff, faculty, and students, but how we communicate that outwards. As a gay man, I can initially think about that, not here at the college necessarily, because we do have a policy, but under state law, I am not protected I could be fired for being gay technically. There's no anti-bullying laws on being gay, lesbian, transgender. And so I like to see the college take a lead in that and have a greater voice outside the college to start advocating for that.
I would say being more purposeful in terms of the hiring practices but those are adjuncts. We post, there are certain, and again, this may be specific based on the campuses, but we post on certain set places, Indeeds and internal posting and, higher ed jobs. But I use an example of Homeland Security and Public Safety, which includes fire science. If we have a posting, why not send that to the Black Firefighters Association? Why not send that to the Jewish Fighters Association to diversify that pool? And I also think we need to look at the demographics of the students within the programs and see because adjuncts make up a large proportion of our instructors, look at the demographics of our adjuncts in relation to our students and including full-time faculty and saying, are we represented? I don't think it has to start from a statewide systems level. It can start at the program level wide. So when you have adjuncts leave, while you're casting a blanket request, be more purposeful in terms of sending that job description to a group that more represents students within the program. And then faculty being more purposeful in terms of getting that information to the chairs or whoever may be in the hiring practice of saying, hey, have you thought about sending this to the Black journalist for a communications adjunct position? Empower them to be able to do that.
I'd like to follow up with you, Julius. Part of what I think about, and this is actually kind of similar to what you're saying, but there's a twist. So my population, like I mentioned before, I had a lot of white males in my classes. So if I was to try to get an adjunct that matches my student body, I would only hire white males. So while you're right, we need to focus on having the right demographics. It's also important to think about who is going to be in that classroom to help stretch their minds and realize that maybe this Middle Eastern person that can teach them about, statics or whatever in engineering, they're the right person. They have the knowledge and they're not like you, and that's okay. And you're going to work with people from all over the world if you're in an engineering field or really in any field nowadays. So be ready for that. And here's exposure and some experience that you can have that's positive because our school provided it in a safe avenue for you. So I like that, but we have to be careful.
Yeah, I think you're wise to bring up adjunct faculty because if the strategic plan mentions equity, Ivy Tech can't accomplish its goals in equity without thinking carefully about our different types of faculty, full-time faculty and adjunct faculty. So I think my recommendation is for Ivy Tech to think about equity in terms of its different types of faculty.
Okay, well, I want to just again thank each of you very authentically for sharing your ideas and your opinions today. I think it's been a great conversation. As we talked about earlier, what we'd like to do is to actually have this be the first of probably at least a couple more conversations that we will have. We will bring together, as long as you're willing to do it, the same group, probably in 6 months and then maybe in a year, and just kind of see what kind of progress you feel like we're making at Ivy Tech. And also maybe dig a little deeper into some of the topics we didn't have time to talk about today. There's an article called Undue Burden that I know I shared with each of you. It focuses on diverse faculty and how sometimes they're asked to do a lot of things on top of their regular responsibilities that don't necessarily always get rewarded. So that's kind of an interesting area of discussion that we really didn't get to talk about today. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about that next time. And before we close, though, I want to just say, Alex, you probably won't be in our next conversation in 6 months. And I just want to give you a chance to tell us where you're heading and why you're going to be leaving us at Ivy Tech.
Well, I'm going to be heading down to Alabama. My wife picked up a tenure track position at Auburn, and I've got my first interview on Monday for a job at a community college in Opelika, right there next to us. So I'm excited that I have an opportunity to find out if I can get something cool going on. And hopefully they'll listen to this podcast and be like, oh, let's hire them.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we hope that happens, Alex, and thank you for wanting to be part of this, even in your really next to the last day of being employed at Ivy Tech.
Thank you.
So thank you again, and we will plan on talking again with this group and seeing what kind of progress we're making on this really important topic. Well, as you know, every episode of the podcast ends with a call to action. We are anticipating that we will be gathering this group of faculty together for at least 2 more follow-up discussions to discuss additional aspects of the challenges and realities facing Ivy Tech as we develop our strategic planning goal on diversity, equity, and belonging. If you have specific suggestions for areas we should discuss next time, or stories about your own experiences around diversity as an employee or student at Ivy Tech, or possibly elsewhere, we know we have podcast listeners from around the country, We'd love to hear them. You can send them to us at our email address or website or leave us a voicemail. We'll be giving you that information in just a minute. Is there something important that you believe our team needs to keep in mind as the 8th strategic planning goal on diversity is put together? If so, please share that with us as well. You can also contact our Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Doran Moreland, at doran.moreland, Moreland, at ivtech.edu. In today's show notes, you will find a link to a June 4th, 2019 article from Inside Higher Education called Undue Burden. The article is based on a survey of 469 ecology and evolutionary biology faculty members from underrepresented groups across the United States. It discusses the unrecognized work that many underrepresented faculty members perform by virtue of their status that may go unrecognized by the evaluation and promotion process. And we will be talking about that issue a bit more in one of our future episodes with this panel. So once again, thank you for joining us today. This is Russ Baker, and now I'm going to turn over the end credit reading to my colleague, Colette Emery.
I want to thank the members of today's panel. Alexander Antic, Assistant Professor and Program Chair of Mechanical Engineering and Technology at Lafayette. Julius Edwards, Administrative Faculty and Dean of the School of Public Affairs and Social Services, Indianapolis. Colette Emery, Associate Professor and Department Chair of Communication and Student Success, Lake County. Aaron Lehman, Associate Professor of English at Columbus. And Tony Ramey, Assistant Professor of Business at Fort Wayne. Today's guest host for this episode was Russ Baker, Vice President for Academic Affairs at Ivy Tech. You can connect with him at rbaker80 at ivtech.edu. Your regular host for our college, Your Voices, is our provost, Dr. Carol Monroe. You can connect with her on Twitter at KNMTweets. Our producer is Ann Penny Valentine. Ann is on Twitter at IndyPenny. You can reach us by email at ourcollegeyourvoices at ivtech.edu. Leave us a voicemail at 317-572-5049. Our website is www.ivtech.edu/podcast. It is maintained by Tracy Allen. Production assistance is provided by Becky Campbell, Sarah DeWitt, and the Ivy Tech Community College marketing team. Our podcast concept is by Matthew Pittman, and logistics for today's panel were provided by Michelle Vaughn. Theme music, recording, and post-production services are provided by Jen Eads at the Brassy Broadcasting Company. We'll see you next time on Our College, Your Voices.